Well, today we are privileged to have with us Professor Joost Hiltermann from the International Crisis Group. He's currently the director of the Middle East and North Africa program. Thanks for being with us, Joost. Today we had a talk where you presented some ideas about the socio-economic and political drivers of conflict in the Middle East and North Africa region. Can you please refer to some of those drivers that we have to pay attention to?
Yeah, well, we often talk about the drivers of conflict being any number of political issues, but if we look at the conflicts today in Yemen and Syria and Libya, in the past in Iraq, we can look at governance questions and foreign interventions and aggressions and whatnot that lead to these kinds of conflicts. But we tend to forget the deeper drivers of conflict, which may not precipitate conflicts in and of themselves, but shape the more immediate drivers of conflict. So we're talking, for example, about climate change. Climate change, or the impact of climate change itself, until now, has not caused conflict. But we risk going in that direction if we fail to address the various serious economic and social challenges that climate change is starting to create through the droughts, for example, in Iraq and Iran and in the Arab Gulf states, the resource scarcity generally in North Africa and elsewhere, the extreme heat in some places, which is going to make it impossible for people to inhabit certain areas, and it's going to drive them out into areas where other people are living. So all of these are maybe around the corner. We need to understand what is happening with them if we also want to understand how we can reduce the more immediate drivers of conflict.
When we look currently at the Middle East and North Africa, we see that there's a proliferation of conflicts and different types of conflicts and the origins and what motivates them. You've referred to the clusters of conflicts. What do you mean by that?
So historically, if we look back at the last 100 years, since the end of the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, we see essentially we can choose to organize them in clusters, families of conflicts, where we see the emergence of a dysfunctional order coming out of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire, imposed by the French and British colonial powers, with certain borders being established at that time, and governing systems within them that never really worked very well, because they were not reflecting actually the needs of the local population and the complexity of the local populations. We see the creation of the State of Israel, which the Arab world saw as an attempt to divide that world into feuding states. We see the Iranian Revolution in 1979 with its own conflicts coming out of that, the creation of Hezbollah, but also the Sunni-Shia sectarian rift. We see the intra-Sunni struggle that is accelerated, especially after the siege of Mecca in 1979 also, and the emergence of a split between the Muslim Brotherhood and other forms of Islam, political Islam. Today, the struggle between Saudi Arabia and the Emirates on the one side and Qatar and Turkey on the other, for example. Also the emergence of jihadist organizations. And then the fifth cluster is really the conflicts that came out of the Arab uprisings. The Arab uprisings themselves are a rejection of the cluster one sort of disorder, and an attempt to create something new, but nothing new has come about. Instead, we've seen civil wars and the return with a vengeance of fierce states like Egypt that have become even more repressive than the predecessors that they replaced, the Mubarak regime. So that's where we are. And the thing, the utility of using this particular framing is that if we fail to connect these clusters and see, in fact, that today's conflicts are all interconnected through these clusters, then also we're not going to find any lasting solutions, because we're basically either tackling one aspect, ignoring another, or maybe even making it worse, or generally doing more harm simply because we don't have the proper understanding of what drives these conflicts in the first place, because all these drivers have become mixed up along with the actors that they have produced.
Well, that leads me to a question on the research that is being produced mostly in think tanks and academia about the state of the region, the Middle East and North Africa, and what are the ills that affect the region, How do you see that? How is it the evolution from before the Arab uprisings in 2011 until nowadays? Do you miss something? Do you suggest something needs to be done in a different way?
Well, so if you look back at the analysis of the last 10, 15 years before the Arab uprisings, and you look at it, what is being written today, then there's still a lot of common themes. And I mean, the way I write also, I still reflect things that actually were said 10 or 15 years ago, with policy recommendations that were never really implemented, and that then gave, in a way, it's not what caused the Arab uprisings, but the Arab uprisings were symptomatic of the deeper grievances that were so well described before then. And so what we really need now is to go beyond it and say, listen, wait a minute, our prescriptions were not heeded by the Western world that interacted with countries in the Middle East, not by regimes in the Middle East, obviously. So what do we need to do now? And we need to come with, first of all, I think, the new framing, because we need to understand how conflicts have evolved and started to intersect. That is one. And two, we need to come with new policy prescriptions that reflect that new situation. And that also takes into account those deeper drivers that we've been talking about since forever, the governance deficit, the youth bulge, and the demographic growth generally that is not accommodated by governments providing the necessary services, et cetera, et cetera. So we now need to take a holistic approach. And then we need to figure out what, as Western states, we need to do in order not to do further harm, first of all, but secondly, to actually do something constructive. And I think the first step we need to take is a very thorough self-examination of what we've done wrong in the past. Because if we don't start from that basis, then the solutions we come up with will simply repeat those mistakes. And that will require a very honest accounting. And I think that's where our analysis should start.
That's a very important recommendation, and we are thankful to you for sharing with us your analysis and for the rich contents that you've presented today. And we hope to see you again soon at the Elcano Royal Institute. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me, Haizam. It was a pleasure. Thank you.